Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast, looking ahead to this weekend's Hungarian Grand Prix. From racingnews365.com, my name is Nick Golding and I'm joined as always by lead editor Ian Parks, but no Sam Coop, who is joining us in spirit, I would like to imagine, from a sunny beach in Spain. Ian, it is Hungarian Grand Prix week. We already know it's going to be an absolute scorcher in terms of the weather. But with Mercedes now back in the fight, it looks set to be a really good weekend.
Yeah, just to quickly touch on that weather briefing that you gave there, Nick. Hungary and Central Europe in particular is undergoing some sort of major heat wave right now. It's slightly eased off, but when I only say slightly, it means that temperatures have dipped from what were in the 40s just a few days ago down now to the mid-30s. So that's what we can expect across the course of this weekend. Of course, when you have temperatures like that, you have thunderstorms bubbling up in the region. So who knows what we might get across the course of this weekend, other than it is going to be extremely hot, in stark contrast, of course, to what we experienced at Silverstone just over a week ago. Cold, wet, wind, rain, typical British weather. And here we go, straight into Hungary, and it is going to be an absolute scorcher. That is really going to play havoc on tyres, tyre choice, because as we know, once the heat gets in, particularly those kind of temperatures, then it does make the degrading and the wear on the rubber, Pirelli's rubber, quite a significant factor. So that's going to be an interesting one to call and watch over the course of that weekend. With regard to Mercedes, 3 in a row this weekend.
There's a good chance.
There's an excellent chance. George, as we know, was obviously a touch fortunate with regard to what happened in Austria. He was on course to finish third. Then we had Lando and Max colliding, taking Lando out of the race, Max needing an extra pit stop for fresh tyres, finishing fifth, even despite that penalty that he received for causing a collision. But George was there to take the spoils. And then, of course, we had a win on merit for Mercedes with Lewis Hamilton, ending that astonishing near 1,000-day drought between Grand Prix victories since his previous one in Saudi Arabia in 2021. As we said, 3 in a row. I think there's a very good possibility. We know Mercedes goes well around the Hungaroring predominantly. We know Lewis loves that track. It's one of his favourites, given the number of victories he's already had there. So I'm not ruling them out. Most definitely not. Red Bull got this major upgrade coming. Helmut Marko, the Red Bull advisor, has turned around and said it has to work. So he's recognising the fact that they are now under pressure from McLaren, from Mercedes. Bearing in mind, Mercedes has won the last 2 Grand Prix. And as I say, on merit in Silverstone in particular. So they've got this upgrade package. They're trying to find their way to overcome the deficit that they feel that they've got at the moment to McLaren and Mercedes. Will this work? Helmut is saying it has to work if Red Bull is to really make its mark again on the Constructors' Championship in particular, because it knows it is in a major fight, especially with McLaren. Bearing in mind that Sergio Perez is no longer pulling his weight at that team.
You mentioned there, obviously, how Mercedes in recent years, since the introduction of these regulations, have always performed quite well at the Hungarian Grand Prix, despite the fact, its diva concepts, the W13 and the W14, seem to work nowhere else. The concept of the W15 is very different, obviously, to what Mercedes has ran the last 2 seasons. Do you think that could potentially have an impact on their performance this weekend, or are you still very confident that actually Mercedes, for the first time since 2021, could claim this weekend a 3rd consecutive victory? It's definitely a real possibility that they could do it this weekend, because the last time the Mercedes claimed 3 in a row was obviously Hamilton's late charge in 2021 to take the title fight to Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, I do really believe that they're in the fight, without a shadow of a doubt. We have discussed this in previous conversations on our updates and in our podcasts. And what Mercedes has done to that car this season has been quite revelatory in many
Yeah.
respects when you consider what it went through in 2022 and 2023 following the introduction of those aerodynamic regulations, the ground effect, and obviously Mercedes struggled with that's almost an understatement
Yeah.
compared to what it had achieved over the previous 8 years of its constructors' championship dominance. It just could not find a way out of the hole into which it had dug itself in many respects, and then finally into this season, it's managed to turn a corner, and in turning that corner, it has then developed the W15 over a sustained period of time, updates being delivered almost every race. We know for this weekend, there are further updates on that car. Are they the visible type? Are they the ones that we cannot see? We don't know. They've done that in the past. Where, just to outline what I'm saying there, every Friday, the FIA produces a document and it outlines the updates that are delivered on each car for each team going into the Grand Prix weekend. It comes out on a Friday morning before first practice. And in the past, we've seen that teams have detailed what their updates have been. However, there are hidden updates that do not have to be detailed like within that particular Red Bull document, because it has effects that are not part specific or updates specific. It's just something where they've made a tweak and it's added something to the car. Sometimes they can even be circuit specific. We know with the Hungaroring, for argument's sake, this weekend, it is a high downforce track, given the number of turns. It's been described as a mini Monaco in many respects because of the number of turns. Monaco without the walls as well is another phrase that the Hungaroring has, another moniker that the Hungaroring has taken on board. So we're yet to see what specific updates are going to be on the car for the W15 and the RB20 in particular. McLaren, we're going to have to wait to see what they are going to produce. We know that they're definitely in the mix with what they are delivering. It's just that they've had mistakes from Lando's side of the garage in particular that he's obviously not been very happy with. We saw what it was like post Silverstone, really beating himself up with regards to some of the decisions made, some of the calls taken, and some of his own calls and decisions I'm referring to there as well, not just via the team.
Yeah.
So those three teams are absolutely fighting for that Grand Prix victory this weekend. As to Ferrari, where they might be,
who knows?
Well, reading again more comments from Helmut, he's completely dismissed the threat from Ferrari for the rest of this season. So thanks ever so much, Ferrari, for turning up for about half a dozen races over the course of this year. But according to Helmut, that's it. You're out of the running now. So
and that's really interesting, because obviously we're at this point now where obviously Hamilton it kind of feels like now the farewell Mercedes tour has kind of started after winning at Silverstone. Toto Wolff has said that all of a sudden the data is making sense between obviously what they're seeing in the simulator in the wind tunnel compared to now on the circuit. You then look at Ferrari, who seem to have everything going their way at the start of the season, both on track, off track, in terms of their strategies as well. Whereas now there's been a huge flip reversal where Ferrari just look a bit lost. They're going back to making some quite crucial strategic errors. And obviously you've got Hamilton now has found himself with what seems to be potentially the best seat on the grid at this current moment. Obviously it's changing very, very quickly. And he's now looking at a team that he's joining for next season who are kind of where Mercedes were a few months ago, and that they just look a bit lost.
Yeah, you got to remember though, Nick, we're only at that halfway stage.
I know, only halfway stage.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. We're 12
already
races
though,
gone.
It's changed already though so much this season. You had Ferrari at the top of Red Bull, and now all of a sudden they can't even compete with Mercedes, who were at some circuits, a second slower than Ferrari earlier this season. It's crazy how, despite the fact 2026 is so close, we are seeing such a massive change in the pecking order so close to a new set of regulations being introduced.
It's giving us the Grand Prix racing that
Yeah,
we've long wanted to see, because we're now going into a Grand Prix this weekend and obviously Belgium the following weekend, this European doubleheader before the August summer break. And we're having a wonderful discussion. And I'm sure it's the same amongst our viewers and readers as well, as to like, they don't really know who's going to win this Grand Prix. And that's exactly the way Formula One racing should be. For all too long, you know, we were doing our bold predictions, and yes, well, we're trying to make them as bold as and imaginative as possible. Deep down, we always knew that it was going to be Red Bull winning, Max winning, etc. Now we're specifically going into Hungary, and we're really not sure. We're saying updates on this car, updates on that car. Helmut Marko saying these updates have to work because we're behind McLaren and Mercedes in terms of pace, in terms of our base now. So that gives you some idea as to where we are now at. And in terms of Ferrari, yes, it has taken this wrong turn with its last major upgrade, which was added to the car ahead of the Spanish Grand Prix weekend. It had added one in Imola. That worked brilliantly. And we saw Ferrari really coming to the fore. They looked like they were the main team to challenge Red Bull at the time. Great victory for Charles Leclerc, of course. And now, as I say, that second upgrade package, or second major upgrade package, because they were adding little bits and pieces in between, just hasn't worked on the back of the Imola spec upgrade. So it's now going to be fascinating to see what step Ferrari takes going into the Hungaroring, because as we saw, the Imola upgrade spec worked superbly around Monaco. Tight, twisty, and we've got a very similar, we know it's very different, but very similar, you know what I'm saying, folks?
Yeah.
Very similar type of circuit. Tight, twisty, numerous corners. So does that play to the strength of Ferrari? Are they going to come to the fore this weekend again? Are they going to have to revert more to that Imola spec package? Have they got something else up their sleeve? Have they recognized the deficiencies of that second upgrade package that was introduced in Spain? And now they're having to work backwards to then go forwards again. So I'm not too worried for Lewis at this particular time, and I'm sure many people aren't, with him going to Ferrari for next season. Bearing in mind, yes, Mercedes is now ahead of Ferrari, because I'm sure that there are enough clever people within Ferrari to recognize the wrong turn that they have made. Yes, they might have to go back and build again on top of that Imola spec, but I've no qualms that Ferrari will again come to the party at some stage over this second tranche of 12 Grand Prix. Bearing in mind, with 12 gone, 12 to go, and that they will be giving Lewis a reasonable car going into 2025.
And at least Ferrari do have a good foundation to return to if they do go back, obviously, to the Imola spec, and obviously the Spanish Grand Prix upgrade just hasn't worked effectively. Very similar to what happened to Aston Martin last season. Started the year so strong, introduced some upgrades, and just kind of fell away. But let's talk about Red Bull, because we mentioned them a little bit in conversation. It feels like a big weekend for them. They've got a bigger lead, or should I say, Max Verstappen has a bigger lead in the Drivers' Championship than Red Bull do in the Constructors, which kind of tells the story of how this year has been. Max is still very much the lead driver in the championship, whereas in the terms of the teams, Red Bull aren't really that lead outfit anymore. And a bigger reason for that is, of course, Sergio Perez. We've obviously heard stories of what could potentially be coming soon, some of the potential clauses in his contract, and the troubling situation he's found himself in. This is a big weekend, given that, as you've mentioned, we don't quite know who's going to be on top this weekend in Hungary. This is a big weekend for Sergio Perez to support Max Verstappen and Red Bull, because the gap in the constructors to the likes of McLaren in particular is shrinking at quite a pace all of a sudden.
Yeah, Max, just quickly to talk about him, as you mentioned, he's got an 84-point lead in the driver standings over Lando Norris. And okay, there's 12 Grand Prix to go, and quickly doing math off the top of my head, 12 Grand Prix plus an additional 3 sprints, you're looking at a total of, I think, 336 points, just off the top of my head, maximum
Sounds good to me.
available
Maths was not my
25
forte.
for a win. Yeah, 25 for a win. Fastest lap point, let's not forget, 8 points for a sprint victory. So I think that's 336, just doing very quickly the maths.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a chunk of points to play for, but it is an 84-point lead. That is effectively 3 Grand Prix victories and then some on top of that Lando has to claw back in terms of that points gap. So you've got to think that with the way teams are taking points off one another at the top, yes, Max is not dominating the way he has done, but you've got to think that with no one driver, no one team making a significant leap or impact into that lead that Max has, then I would suggest he's relatively safe at this halfway stage of the season. Absolutely, you cannot rule anything out. So I'm not going to say that Max is definitively going to win a 4th consecutive driver's title, but he has a comfortable enough cushion that he should be able to maintain that gap going through to the end of the season. Could still be tight at the end of the year, we never know, but at least still providing us intrigue at the halfway stage. Whereas if you think, Nick, going back after race 4 or 5, it was looking like it was going to be another Max domination.
But interestingly, though, that's an interesting point there, because it's because of that early season domination why he now has this buffer, which in a way kind of shows how useful it was for Red Bull to have come out the block so quickly. Because, you know, if you imagine that McLaren and Mercedes have been there with Red Bull from day one this season, then that 84-point gap probably wouldn't be there. So that's quite a critical thing when you think about it, that Red Bull's early season dominance could actually have a massive say in, you know, Max winning this championship by a canter once again, or whether it does go right down to the wire.
Yeah, as you say, that start, it's spot on assessment, in fairness to you, Nick. It's
I have my moments.
Exactly.
Very few. But...
You have your moment. There you go. You can say, doff your cap for that one. Absolutely. You know, we all thought, we said it on the first few podcasts that we did and F1 updates, that this was looking likely it was going to be another Max walkover, Red Bull domination, and we've not had that. The overriding feeling is, and Christian Horner, the team principal, has mentioned this before, that they are now almost at the peak of the curve in terms of the development of that car, that there is not much left to add to it to try and get it back ahead of its rivals into that dominant position that it has previously enjoyed. It, as I say, it is at the top of the curve. That's why McLaren and Mercedes, though, have managed to come with their major upgrades. McLaren over the course of the past 12 months, as we know. Mercedes over the course of this season so far, and most definitely from about the quarter way point in total of this particular season, from about race 5 or 6. And now all of a sudden, because it has found that correct path, it is able to make these considerable gains with its own updates that it has been adding to the W15. So at least it is giving us this fascinating Constructors' Championship picture. Mercedes, though, because of its slow start this season, for my money, is just too far back. I was just about to take a quick look at the championship standings, and they are 152 points behind Red Bull at this stage. That, for me, is too much. Bearing in mind the number of points that are on offer over the 12 Grand Prix. It's a massive chunk. It's over 500 points when you tally up all the Constructors' Championship points that are available. However, Ferrari 71, okay, we've discussed them to a certain extent, and they really need to, again, turn that corner if they're going to be, again, challenging Red Bull. But for me, it's McLaren that's the fascinating one. They are 78 points adrift, and that, without a shadow of a doubt, is definitely doable, in particular when you have 2 drivers at the fore, as Lando and Oscar Piastri are at McLaren, compared to Red Bull right now, is really, as we've discussed, and I'm going to use the phrase again, fighting with one hand behind its back, because it has one driver in Max Verstappen who is a cut above, and the other driver in Sergio Perez in exactly the same machinery that just is not cutting it at the minute. We know Christian Horner has turned around and said, Checo is underperforming. You know, a clear and outright statement as to where he feels the Mexican driver is at. Helmut Marko, in, again, comments coming out of Silverstone, has basically turned around and said he's effectively got these 2 races in Hungary and Belgium to save his seat, and then we will assess. You can only assume if he doesn't start delivering, and I think we're talking certainly minimum top 5 in terms of a Grand Prix finish, hoped for podium, then they're going to be seriously considering over the summer break replacing Checo Perez.
And obviously, for those who are watching on YouTube, obviously, Ian, you could answer this question as well. But for those who are watching this podcast on YouTube, let us know who you think, Red Bull should bring into the seat should Sergio Perez go, because obviously it's incredible to think that it was only a couple of months ago he was given this 1+1 deal, obviously keeping him for 2025 with the option to extend it through to 2026. Now, of course, it's kind of, become aware there are clauses in this deal which mean he could be gone as soon as after potentially the Belgian Grand Prix and not be at Red Bull for the second half of this season. It's crazy how much that story has turned so quickly. But even Horner has kind of joked himself that they were hoping this contract would, give Sergio some confidence, bring his form back. That hasn't happened for you, though. Obviously nothing's guaranteed. We don't know what's going to happen. But if Sergio were to lose his seat for the second half of the season and going forwards, who do you put in? Because, of course, you've got Liam Lawson, but he did an amazing job replacing Daniel Ricciardo. But to then jump straight into the Red Bull is a lot of pressure for him. Do you go for Yuki Tsunoda, who also has a deal for next year and is performing the best he ever has in the sport? Or do you go for Daniel Ricciardo, who, okay, isn't having a good season in all fairness to him, but has that experience alongside Max and also experience of working with the Red Bull outfit themselves?
It's a great question, Nick.
It's such a tough one.
You've only got to see particular comments of people, and even, when I'm talking about our fans, our viewers, our readers, and just looking around generally, and there is this split as to who they feel should go in the car. Some suggest Daniel simply because of his experience. Now, we know he is a Christian Horner favourite. Christian brought him out of the cold following his exit from McLaren, brought him in as the third driver, and as we know, pretty much exactly a year ago, he had that test with the Red Bull, proved himself comfortably in the RB19 of last year because it was a Pirelli test, and he managed to get within, just fractions of a second of the pole time that Max Verstappen had set at last year's British Grand Prix. And that for Red Bull was an easy decision to make to allow them to oust Nick de Vries and bring in Daniel Ricciardo. Daniel, however, barring the odd performance here or there, and even by his own admission, has not performed to the standard that he would have liked, especially at the start of this season, when he made it abundantly clear that his target was for the second Red Bull seat for next season. He was hoping to oust Checo Perez, well, not oust, but replace Checo Perez because Checo's contract was up at the end of this year. That's not happened. He now finds himself very much almost fighting for his seat now at RB. What's going to happen to him, we're not sure. Could he be the one to replace Checo because he is a Christian Horner favourite? He does have the experience. He's fought alongside Max previously. And then, of course, Nick, we've got Yuki Tsunoda, who many believe should be the driver propelled into the Red Bull opportunity, simply because of his longevity in the junior ranks with AlphaTauri, with RB. He signed a new contract, as we know, only recently to continue with RB into 2025. The thing that lets Yuki down for me, and you've got to wonder if this is the same thing within the Red Bull family, is Yuki's temperament. He's worked really hard on that over time, but there are too many instances, from my mind, where he's let himself down with that temperament, and he's voiced his frustration over the radio. He's used expletives, and you've got to wonder, when you've got to feel that if you're going to be Max's teammate, you kind of need a cooler head, particularly when you're fighting at the front, when you're, really fighting for those podiums, those top position points that the team really needs for the constructors. And then you have this young up-and-comer, Liam Lawson, who proved himself in the cameo role for last season when he stood in for Daniel Ricciardo when Daniel broke his hand or broke a finger in his hand in several places that kept him out for a handful of Grand Prix, and Liam came in and delivered. Do you give the rookie a chance in that Red Bull seat? It's a real dilemma. Again, I'm going to go back to some Helmut Marko comments, and I'm going to give due credit because they're in his Speed Week column. Speed Week is a publication in Austria, and it has a column, as I say, with Helmut Marko, a regular column, and he often produces some great content within it. And I'm just going to read out the comments because I think they basically say it all as to where Helmut Marko's mind is at. And he's basically turned around and said that he's in favour of giving young people a chance in Formula One. And then he says, I can't name any names, but there are drivers in the field who are stagnating and are better or worse depending on the mood. They are blocking the way for the young drivers. The teams are also afraid of juniors. Of course they make mistakes, but I'd rather someone makes mistakes and has hope for the future than there being no further improvement. Now, you can read into that what you like, folks, but for me, that's a finger pointing at Daniel Ricciardo and another finger pointing at Liam Lawson. But we are completely aware of this dynamic that exists inside Red Bull. It's played itself out over the course of this season and in the early part of the season in particular, between Christian Horner, between Helmut Marko and Jos Verstappen, of course. We all know what entailed at the start of this season. So we know that there's this split, Christian on one side, Helmut on the other. And this is Helmut quite clearly having his say as to who he feels should be promoted, should they decide to jettison Checo over the course of the summer break. Quite clear he wants Daniel out as well in many respects from what I'm reading into those comments, and he'd love Liam to be given that opportunity. Once again, it's part of that fascinating internal power play that's going on behind the scenes inside Red Bull.
And you've also got to remember that Red Bull have another junior driver in Isaac Hadjar, who is currently leading F2 as well, and obviously performing very, very well. Moving on to the final talking point, and it's kind of linked to what we've just discussed, but obviously you look at Haas, who are having a tremendous season. It's arguably, in my opinion, probably their strongest in F1 to date, given how consistently they have performed across the year in the points, in particular Nico Hülkenberg. They sit just 4 points behind RB in the fight for sixth in the Constructors' Championship. We also just mentioned, who could replace Sergio Perez potentially. Do you think the fact that Haas are so close to RB, and we know how much money is at play in the Team's Championship, do you think that's going to play a role in that? For example, if Red Bull were to take Yuki Tsunoda out of that team to replace Sergio Perez, that kind of thing could potentially allow Haas to overtake RB in the standings, receive more money, should obviously the driver that replaces Yuki at RB then not score as many points. Do you think that could be a factor that RB and Red Bull, considering that Haas are a genuine threat for sixth?
You've got to take that into consideration, Nick. Haas are a fascinating team right now because they've had these great results over the course of these past two Grand Prix. Nico Hülkenberg in particular, sixth in both Austria and Silverstone. And he's really propelling that team forward, even though he's leaving at the end of this season, as we well know, to go to the stake Audi proposition that's coming up 25-26, of course. But yes, 4 points, the gap. And there is, as you say, a huge chunk of money at play as well between these different respective positions in the Constructors' Championship. So you've got to think from RB's perspective that, of course, yes, they will now want the strongest lineup going forward to perhaps not only retain or hold on to that sixth place, but do they have sights on Aston Martin ahead of them? Because Aston Martin is not pulling up trees. It's struggling to make its way into the top 10. Decent performance and results from Lance and Fernando at Silverstone that's at least allowed it to open up a bit of a gap again over RB. I think it's 37 points, if I'm right in saying, in the Constructors' Championship between Aston Martin and RB, with Haas another 4 points further back. For me, what's going to be fascinating for this particular weekend is to see how the upgrades on the Haas work. They came into force at Silverstone, and quite clearly we saw what an impact it has made on the cars for Nico and Kevin. Great result for both drivers. Kevin getting into the points for the first time in a while, so he was able to deliver at a time when we know his position and future is under threat. We're not quite sure what is going to happen to the day in there as to where he's going to go. But most definitely now, as I say, it's going to be fascinating to see exactly what those upgrades will do in terms of the performance across Hungary and across Belgium, two very, very different tracks compared to what we've had around Silverstone, of course. So, lot to play for this weekend, Nick. Still a lot going on in the driver market, still a lot going on in the Drivers' Championship, and in particular, a lot going on in the Constructors' Championship for all the points that we've just discussed over this past half hour. It's going to be two great weekends, I think, going into the summer break now, that's for sure.
This weekend is definitely going to be hot on the circuit, hot off the circuit, and hot in the air as well. On that point, Ian, to round things up, a bold prediction for the weekend. And, I'll do the honours. I'll go first. I'll give you a few seconds. I think we're going to have... I should have let you go first because I've now got to think. I think we're going to have a different race winner this weekend. So I think Oscar Piastri. There you go. He's not won a race yet this season. And yeah, Oscar's going to win. There you go. That's my bold prediction. Your turn.
I'm gonna go, in which case, for back-to-back Lewis Hamilton victories.
Go for it.
It's the circuit he loves. He's finally got the car, for the most part, in the sweet spot that he has long wanted. We're going to see additional updates on the W15 this weekend. Yeah. I think he's going to be the man to beat this weekend, but we can't rule out the McLarens and we can't rule out Max at Red Bull, that's for sure. And I think Haas, they do have a decent car, and I think we are going to see them nudging the top 10 both in qualifying and in the points paying positions on Sunday again.
And who knows what Ferrari will do. Ian, amazing stuff. For those who are watching this podcast on YouTube, be sure to let us know your thoughts on any of the talking points and also your predictions in the comment section below. This has been the latest episode of the Racing News 365.com podcast. From myself and Ian, we will see you this weekend for the F1 updates. See you later.
Take care, folks.